Hello and welcome to RuggaMatrix International. I'm your host, Juro Sen, and as always, I'm joined by Ben Kimber. G'day, Ben.
Hello, Bane. How are you?
Very good. Well, a lot of feedback on YouTube and now Facebook with our show last week. So many things to talk about. Let's not mess around. What is the strike issue of the week for you, Ben Kimber?
Well, mate, no games on the weekend in the Rugby Championship, a bye round. So I think a bit of the noise around that I want to talk about tonight is what are they doing with Super Rugby and the Super Rugby draw?
It has been an issue for a long time. I remember a couple of years ago they couldn't work it out and had to get Terry Doyle, the late Terry Doyle, who I interviewed, and I'll talk about him a bit later, prior to the start of Super Rugby in 1996. They had to go back to him and say, we can't work out the draw with the computer. Could you do it for us? And it turns out it's always been complicated. Adding a few more teams is crazy. Righto, so that's the big issue of the week. Do you want to throw forward to anything else? We get straight into it.
Let's get straight into the issue of the week, and then I think we can cover the other two games after that.
Yep, let's do that.
So for me, a bit of noise around, and it really is disappointing. I mean, SANZAAR looks rudderless in this situation. We're talking about a competition that's in its first year of a new structure and is clearly not a fantastic structure. A lot of issues with it, but they're only 1 year in. So the amount of noise that's around about what to do next, and what really gets me going is that I feel like the reason we have a poor draw or a poor structure now is because they're overreaching. They're trying to create a product before we're ready to have that product, before there's that general growth. We've got a New Zealand conference which has got a nice, solid, strong structure. No one's talking about changing it. But when you look at Australia and you look at South Africa, the decisions seem to have been driven by politics or money, right? Rather than what's good for the game and what's good for the growth of rugby. These things seem to be driven by, let's go for this convoluted structure to try to get the most bang for buck.
I think the fact is they need this content and they don't care who's playing, but as a result of all this content, we've got so many poor games, mismatches. Now, Sean Fitzpatrick's comments about a two-tiered competition makes sense a little bit, but I would go even further. I would brush half the competition, make it 10 teams. I've said this forever, so I haven't just come up with it. 10 teams, home and away. We get used to the teams, Ben. I think it needs to come back to 10, high quality, near test level, but probably more exciting in terms of play, competition matches. To me, that is the solution. I know it sounds like you're going backwards, you're not having more teams, but you can have a secondary competition that isn't as high quality, maybe a relegation system. Over to you, mate.
Well, I'd like to say that, fair play to both yourself and Sean Fitzpatrick. It's good to hear ideas. But I think this is
both good players.
Both good players. But this is a very frustrating conversation to have. Yeah. And let me tell you why I think it's
20 years down the track.
Well, no, but I think it's way out of line right now. Can you imagine what you as a broadcaster who've just forked over all the cash for a structure and a certain number of games to be suddenly having these people say to you, actually, no, we're thinking about dropping a team, we're moving a team, something else might change. I don't know what the structure's going to be next time. It's madness. And I tell you right now, even New Zealand signed up to this a year ago and they agreed to the final structure. So I agree with the New Zealand guys saying it doesn't make a lot of sense when we're dominating that everyone gets a final, but that's a TV product. This has been set up for TV. They've got money in the bank from TV for these games, and no one is going to really entertain any significant change unless the paymasters are looked after first.
Yeah, so the problem is TV funds the game. So you sort of can't do without it in this modern era because there's a big competitive sports arena out there for athletes. In Australia in particular, we're just battling in rugby to get players from rugby league, AFL and football soccer. And who knows what else. Basketball is huge. It's under the surface, but in a few years' time, look out for basketball because it's taking all the juniors in Australia. They're really keen to play basketball, and there's your second rowers for a starter in rugby union. So it's that grab for talent and cash that is running the game at the moment. But what about the game itself? Someone's got to step back and say, hello, what made rugby great? And what made rugby attractive for the big TV networks to go with Super Rugby in 96 onwards?
Yeah. Shout out to Dwight Ashford on our Facebook page, who was calling for a top 8 rather than a conference system, which I think has merit too, right? Maybe more of a round robin style event in the top 8. But I think for me, I'm not sure yet in my mind what the right model is, but I think what is clear is the SANZAAR discussion around global dominance, it makes them sound silly. That sounds to me like people are positioning themselves for their next broadcast deal in a couple of years' time, that we're going to dominate the globe. For me, it looks like less teams in South Africa, less teams in Australia. Get those numbers down so you get more quality. And if you've got to up the games and the round robin a bit to cover your broadcast, do that. But for me, Australia has struggled with the teams that we have. South Africa have got a number of teams based on what looks like the politics of the area rather than the cattle that they have. So I think we need those less teams. And these stories that are floating out around now about we've got to draft players who aren't playing in New Zealand or South Africa into Australia, or we've got to draft youngsters out of the Queensland Reds and get them into Perth. No, I don't think we do. I think we have too many teams.
100%. And I think when you have too many teams, the argument is if you have extra teams, you can bring players up to play with the best players. But once it's diluted so badly, it falls to pieces. Now, Fitzpatrick was saying, and when he was on radio, I think it was on radio, forgive me if I'm wrong on the show that he was on, but he suggested that that the idea of a two-tiered system was that you might have, the Argentinian team playing against the Japanese team in Super Rugby. That's a great contest, but when they play against the Hurricanes, for example, it's an absolute whitewash, one-way traffic, and you don't want to see that. But I don't know. I think you can wedge that system together, that conference system, or that sort of two-tiered system together. Let's have a look at Europe then. How they've had their pain as well, haven't they? In Europe, trying to decide what is the best way to go, and money's been a big thing there as well. Yeah,
and I remember, as a general statement, I really love a two-tier system because bringing that excitement of promotion and relegation into a competition is excellent. When I was working at Fox Sports back there, we had Gil McLaughlin from the AFL come in and talk about AFL, and the one thing that he said that he missed in his game was that promotion relegation. So even at the bottom of the competition, you've got some excitement and you've got your fans involved because they're trying to dodge those relegation spots, or conversely they're in the second tier and they're trying to work their way up. But if I can just expand on the number of teams in Australia, we had Graham Henry, and I think we didn't talk about it last week. Graham Henry came out and said...
We weren't trying to avoid it, we just never got to it.
But Graham Henry came out and said, and it got Michael Checker's back up, came out and said the worst Wallabies team that he's seen. Right? Now, whatever you might think of that statement, Graham Henry is allowed to make it. He's a very experienced man, he's been around the block, and this is a Wallabies team that has been struggling. But in the same week following that, there's a couple of other quotes that I want to call out that just show that we don't have the structure right in Australian rugby, that we do need to rethink it, not just at that super level, but underneath as well. Michael Checker's come out and said all the players, the Wallabies going back in the NRC need to lift. He's looked at his own potential squad members and said the Australian players playing in the NRC look like they're just out for a fitness run. They don't look like smashing it up. Yeah. One exception to that, Tolalatu, who came into the squad this week, who he wrapped. But the other quote that I was really surprised didn't get more air in Australia in the last week or so was Toto Kefu, who you and I have talked about as saying, God, we wish we had him now at the back of the scrum. Amazing number 8 for Australia. He's up there coaching in the NRC in Queensland. Kefu, who was trying to lure Lepeti Tamani to play for Tonga, trying to get him to go play for Tonga, but said, if you get the chance to play for the Wallabies, take it. Your family will still be as proud of you as if you played for Tonga. But in the discussion around Lepeti Tamani, Kefu said quite simply, no one in the Wallabies really scares you. He was giving Lepeti a rap, but at the same time, what a backhander to the Wallaby pack. He said, no one in the Wallabies scares you, basically saying this Wallaby pack has no authority. So we've had a week where there's been some real insight into the way people are thinking that the Wallabies and the structure around them aren't there, and even Checker himself is saying it.
I can understand Checker defending himself. That's only a human trait. But here's the thing with Toto Kefu, who I know well. I was his media manager at the Wallabies. I'd covered Queensland rugby for a long time with the ABC and Channel 7. We've not only been at rugby, we've had a few drinks together off the field, quite a few actually. So I know him well and we get on well, but here's a couple of things about him. Firstly, he always speaks the truth. He's not interested in any spin doctoring, so it can be frustrating at time when I'm saying, hey mate, you might not want to talk about this, but then he'll talk to you, Ben. And
as a journo, they're the guys you love.
Yeah, you do love, and that's what I love about him. He would never get overly excited before a game. He could be standing in the tunnel talking about the next race at Doomben at 5 minutes before kickoff, and then he would just go out there and smash up the opposition because he knew how to switch on, Toto Kefu. But I remember when he was man of the match against France in Melbourne, and he actually broke his hand in the first 5 minutes and was still man of the match. And we said, can you just keep that on the down low? And then within 2 seconds, he said, oh yeah, I broke my hand. And so, okay, everyone knows about it now. So Toto was never interested in, and no one wanted him to deceive anyone. We just said, well, maybe just don't tell anyone yet, so we can work out what's going on and protect your injury. But he would be honest about it. So I'm saying all this as a backgrounder about who Toto Kefu is. And he's a pretty upfront, no-nonsense sort of guy. So when he's asked about the physicality of the Wallabies, Ben, he's not going to lie about it.
Yeah.
If he thinks they're not up to it and scaring then it's not about scaring them. And maybe fear is not the right word, but at least respecting the opposition, then I think Toto Kefu is absolutely on the money, and he deserves respect because he's done so much as a player to earn the respect of New Zealand and vice versa. Whenever we had a game against New Zealand and I was the media manager of the Wallabies, I would always save Toto Kefu for the All Blacks test because he respected New Zealand more than anyone else, and he would say things about playing in New Zealand where everyone else was a bit dodgy about it, a bit fearful about it. He would say there would be nothing greater than to beat New Zealand in New Zealand because he respected them so much, and that was the way he approached his rugby, and that's the way he approached the guys across the Tasman. It was all about respect. So given all that respect, his background in the game and his honesty, his brutal honesty, he can say what he likes. He can say like what Graham Henry said. He's got the justification.
I think he can say what he likes. I said, I'm a bit surprised that it didn't get more attention. As I said, it was one quote in a story I saw out of the Courier Mail in Brisbane, but I thought it was really damning of saying, this Wallaby pack needs some grunt. And I think that's a nice way to throw into some of the discussion that we had on YouTube this week around the team. You mentioned Kefu breaking his hand. Across the Tasman, all the back rows have been in the wars this week. Kano's done his shoulder. Sam Kane's still got his hammy. He's no good. David Pocock put a really gross picture of his hand.
Wish there was a bit of warning. If you see it on Instagram,
his hand being operated on Twitter, I think it was.
It was on all the platforms.
Yeah. Well, I had a good discussion on YouTube around some of the back row stuff and some of the players, and I named a Wallaby side that I'd like to see. I'm going to post it again on RuggaMatrix, so have a look. But essentially, it was Slipper, Tatafu if he was fit, but he's not. Moore, Kepu, Simmons, Coleman, back row, Fardy, Hooper, McMahon. Fardy has to come back in to face South Africa. I can't understand why he's been in and out, and I really like to hear from the viewers. So if you've seen something in Fardy's games this year that suggests to you that he shouldn't have been in the Wallabies team, tell me, because all I see is a guy that's been really trucking it up and battling his heart out. He needs to be back in the side. And in the back line, we also talked last week about changes there that I think we need to make our defensive structure and our attack structure a little bit more certain. Genia, Cooper, Spate, Hodge, Folau, Naivalu, I think is going to come in at some point, and Haylett Petty. Now, I'm not saying that's the team right now all the way through, but I think that's a team that could go really well.
All right, so where do you see Cooper then and his long-term future?
Quade Cooper?
Yes.
Quade Cooper, I think you've got to give either Quade Cooper or Bernard Foley that red-hot go at being the long-term number 10, and right now I think it has to be Quade. I think his positional kicking is better. I think he sends players into gaps and positions the back line and players off him better, and both have defensive issues. So I think Foley's had a good crack at it. We've seen some good things out of him, particularly in the World Cup, but right now I think Quade's the man, and I think maybe a straight-running Reece Hodge outside him, Israel Folau into 13, running off the Quade Cooper cutout and getting a bit more involved. I think that's the kind of backline I'd like to see.
See, I think the problem with Australia is that they spent a long time under Michael Foley earning respect as a scrummaging unit. They've been hammered as a scrummaging unit, and they wanted to get all that respect. So they sort of did a pretty good job with that. But it's a constant chase for Australia because naturally Australians don't have a dominating pack. So we've got to work out, Australia's got to work out, hold on, what makes Australia a good rugby team. Can we sort of fake it? And I mean that with respect, to fake the tight five sort of competitiveness. We're the best in the world, the New Zealand's, and of course England and South Africa. Or do we concentrate on what the great things? I shared out a clip the other day, was the rugby from the 70s and 80s of the great Australian backlines. You know, obviously the game's changed, and everyone says, wish we could go back to that, save a coach. Well, a lot of those players end up being coaches anyway. And it's because everyone becomes more sophisticated about their approach and defence and stuff like that, so you can't play the game the same way as you did in the 80s. But gee, it was great to watch. And, you know, I think Australia needs to take a few of those lessons from the past and remember what made Australia good. And I think it starts with the backs.
I think it does. And the other thing, I'll just run through that back line one more time, because there's another point I want to make, and I stumbled over it there before. Yep. But I went from Genia to Cooper, Henry Spade on one wing, Hodge at 12, Folau at 13, the new man Naivalu, I'm hoping he comes good at international level, that's clearly a gamble, and then Hale at Petty at 15. And the other reason that I'm talking about that lineup for what I would like to see is because that is the position those guys play during the Super Rugby.
Yeah.
None of this switching and changing, guys who have to step out and step in, and then defence they're over here and attack they're over here, but guys who have been playing there all year, the number of the jersey they're used to, the place in the back line they're used to, and try and build some continuity is what I'm looking for.
That's my pet hate. Players that have to step up to a higher representative level, playing a position they haven't been playing in all year. To me, that doesn't make sense. You know, there are the odd player that can do that, you know, but you know, you have to be super special.
Well, I'm going to touch on a famous one that was picked apart by your mate Beaver Jones, Leon McDonald, I think it was, back in the 03 World Cup, and just got picked apart as a guy that was out of position. Yeah,
and you know, it was frustrating. Like someone like Tim Horan put on the wing for Australia, that happened as well. He could play there though. That's sort of going the other way around. But although wing is a specialist position on its own, it shouldn't be dismissed in that way. Yeah. So it's not. You know, you got one of the world's best centres playing on the wing, vice versa. Players should be playing in that position they do, playing all year. Also combinations, that's a big thing for me. You know, that also is a great way for a side to automatically come together when you've got combinations around your 15, starting 15, that you can run out on the paddock. So, yeah, that's an interesting side there, Ben. Can I just say, when I said it starts with the backs for Australia, that's not dismissing the forward pack. Yes, I know you have to have at least parity, and now the contact zone is so much more ferocious. It is really hard to win your ball. So, yes, you need that, but we shouldn't overly focus on that. We should try and, we're never going to be the best scrum in the world. I think it's admirable, but it's not going to happen.
If you just get parity.
Yeah.
Now, I think you're talking about getting that power back in the forward pack. Kefu says we're not feared. You know, I'd like to see Sean McMahon in there at 8. I want to see Fardy at 6. I'll probably put Slipper in for CO because we're not seeing the ball carrying. We need more guys who are going to carry the ball, and Wallabies need it this weekend. Loftus Versfeld, Pretoria, the Springboks, you know, on one of their favoured grounds. It's going to be a tough game, and you know it's going to be a battle, and you need to get the big boys in there.
And the teams that do well quite often have a hooker that's world class.
Yeah.
You know, really knows what they're doing, that not only hits their targets, but runs around the field brilliantly.
Yeah. I was a big fan of Bismarck Duplessis, actually. He was a bit of a favourite of mine.
Yeah.
On the South African side, interesting, Yanchis, you know, his days may be numbered if he keeps playing the way he's going. I hope he gets a few more chances after his super season. The skills that he brings, I hope that he settles in more at international level, but so far he's had a bit of a rough trot, particularly last week against the All Blacks. But Pat Lambie's fit again after his concussion. He's back in the mix. And Willie LaRue's also been recalled into the squad. So there's some depth there that the South African teams are bringing back in, and that should be a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, I think so. Do you want to go to the strike viewer comments of the week?
The strike viewer comments of the week. What I would like to say is some great traction on Facebook this week, guys. We've been really pleased with the amount of viewers we're getting and the comments. We keep them coming. We love to hear what you've got to say. It really does drive different thoughts into us. I want to shout out to some of our Facebook posters this week, particularly those who tagged underneath some of their friends. Mark Maloney, Bobby Payne, Rapera Harawira. David Yardley wanted both the captain and the coach gone from the Wallabies. Mario Kerahai, Noble Williams, Kane Mitchell, Maxi Utrich, Mr. Palauni Moananu. Milanita Vakatau and Corey Taylor, Dino Tate and Alan Bunce.
Oh.
Thanks, guys.
Ben, go Ben.
Keep the comments coming. But the guys I want to call out on YouTube, remember we had the YouTube handle of the week last week.
Oh, yes.
And we had, this week there's a couple. One, Hypo Relaxer. Hypo Relaxer wants to have a beer with us, and we said we might set that up. We might do a show in a pub.
That's our second job.
But the handle of the week, Erotic Chewbacca.
Ah, yes.
Erotic Chewbacca, mate. If that's
just,
not a great YouTube
conjures
handle.
up all sorts of imagery.
But
being a Star Wars fan,
Being a Star Wars
I think
fan.
I've got it down here, actually.
Now, the comment of the week, though, and this will be a nice throw into the other game we want to talk about, Argentina, New Zealand. Sport Tempest, though there's a Q in there, not sure about the pronunciation, but Sport Tempest, he really challenged me. Last week I talked about the fact that Reece Hodge, Tim Horan was saying play Reece Hodge on the wing, not at 12, ease him in, and I was saying don't ease him in, play him in the centres. We don't see the All Blacks centres going in via the wing, which we haven't recently, but he reminded me that they've done it plenty of times in the past. Tana Umaga, Sonny Bill, Richard Carr, who he all started on the wing. But the point I replied to him was, in those cases, most of the time those guys were talent. You were trying to fit into a side where there was an established centre pairing, more often than not. And again, correct me if I'm wrong. Whereas with Hodge, there's opportunity in the centres.
Right,
we don't have a settled 12 and 13, and I think there's a chance to get him in there.
Oh, I'd agree with that. Absolutely. Can I also give one of our YouTube commenters a big rap? Casual Observer. I think he should be renamed as Sharp Observer because he's noticed that the devices in front of us tend to change week to week, and I had the Samsung tablet last week, and he gave me a big rap about that. But as a tech reporter, I'm lucky enough to swap every week, and Ben's still got the smaller iPad Pro, and this is the Surface Book, which is
small but perfectly formed, mate.
Surface Book's actually on the blink a bit actually, so that's why behind it, look at that. Old school. Old school to keep it going. But Casual Observer, other than picking up on our technology that we have on the table, and don't forget, thanks to Strike for the viewer comments of the week, that he noticed that in the 20 years of professionalism, in his little post, that the timeline has now elapsed to a period where kids 20 years ago saw a career path laid out for them, and New Zealand have hit that timeline perfectly. I'd love to actually do a nice timeline about how things worked out since 1996 when Super Rugby started, and I think he makes a really valid point about how New Zealand have really planned that along the way. Now, go back to Australia, and when the 99 World Cup was Australia's and the Bledisloe Cup was held for 5 years in a row, it was held because Australia got the jump on everyone else with professionalism, sparked by Rod McQueen and the Brumbies. So the Brumbies really generated this jump start for the Wallabies. Eventually, though, based on pure talent and the will to catch up, New Zealand, South Africa, England, everyone else has caught up to Australia with the professionalism line. Now it's professionalism plus talent and also smarts. So whether or not New Zealand have got to this 20-year mark, have they got to a point now where their lead in terms of professionalism and talent development over that period of time? Because once again, you've seen this is a true career path for rugby players now. That didn't exist before then. There was test matches and maybe a bit of club rugby in Europe, whatever else, but there was a true week-to-week earn that you could earn in the Southern Hemisphere, and a really good one. Has New Zealand got a lead now that no one can match? What do you think, Ben?
Well, I think for now,
Casual Observer.
Well, I think for now it's obvious that they have a lead, right? That's the first thing that we've been talking about the last few weeks, and I think that what's been clear is that through that 20 years, their model is better than what we have in Australia and what we see in South Africa through the contracting structure, the way that the number of teams compared to the amount of talent they've got coming through. They're clearly a way ahead, and they've also then skilled up, right? We can see that in the skill base, the way they've brought all their players along a professional journey, more so than we have, more so than South Africa has. That doesn't mean that is an insurmountable gap by any means. Things can be changed up, things can be moved along, and you can respond. Now, I think what we'll see now is the way that we've seen the All Blacks forwards playing, there's going to be that demand coming through in other countries to make sure they match that. What the All Blacks do next, we don't know. But you'll definitely see other countries respond. And another part of the conversation we've been having on YouTube and on Facebook has been that the All Blacks will lose, right? They're on a great streak now, and how long it goes, we don't know. And All Blacks fans, enjoy it while you can. They'll lose at some point, and there'll be someone who gets their stuff together, right, and works it out on the park. Might be Eddie Jones in 2018, the way they're going, but it's going to happen. And when that happens, you'll see things start to shift again.
All right, so the one team that's got it all right so far, the Rugby Championship, it's all over. So New Zealand and Argentina, do they bother turning up?
Mate, I think that's going to be a really interesting game. I think New Zealand on the road to Argentina. Argentina will find an extra leg at home. They're a rough, tough team, and they'll want to get stuck in at home. Some interesting changes forced on the All Blacks side. Clearly, Sam Cane's hammy's still no good. He's not coming with them. Kano is out with a shoulder injury, and that means there's going to be some changes to that back row. Some pressure on Kieran Reid to carry a young Sevilla to a certain extent. And then who comes in on the side? Elliot Dixon, Liam Squire. Elliot Dixon's a really interesting kind of player. He's had one test cap, wasn't that impressive. Yet to see if he's up to this standard. Well, we'll find out, I think, when we're in Buenos Aires up against the Argentinians. He's also the kind of player, if he does get that start, that I find might be susceptible to niggle. And if you're going to get niggled, you'll get niggled in Buenos Aires and they might drag a yellow card out of him. Yeah, how's that for an Nostradamus?
Oh, there you go. I think they'll do well. Obviously, I believe New Zealand will win the test match, but I think Argentina will target the last game against Australia. I think they're into that sort of stuff. They definitely target the games they want to attack.
Yeah.
And they had a red-hot go against the All Blacks and probably were a bit soft in the game against Australia in the return game in Perth. But I think in this one, they will throw a fair bit at the All Blacks, but look out Australia in the last one. So Australia in South Africa. This is a big test. I think they will be missing Pocock because I think Pocock's a valuable player against South Africa. Ben, what are your thoughts on that game?
He definitely has been. I'd said previously that I would have dropped him because I don't think we're getting the right mix in the back row, and I want to see McMahon, I want to see Fardy, I want to see these guys carry the ball. Look, I think this is a dangerous game for Australia. They gave away 70% of the ball against Argentina. They cannot do that up against South Africa in South Africa. And a point I want to make too, I'll send this link out on the Facebook page and probably put it on YouTube too, but I had a look at some of the stats on the SANZAAR page. And across the top metres gained, the top defenders beaten, the top line breaks, tries, assists, carries, no Australians.
Yeah.
New Zealanders and Argentinians, Australia's attack is not working well. They're just hanging into games. Right across there, the only one, Israel Folau, turns up on carries. Where the Australians turn up is on most tackles and most missed tackles, both Pocock and Hooper at the top of those lists. Yeah. So I think really this game in South Africa is a danger one. If Pat Lambie does come back in, I think a bit more of a control around the park for South Africa. I think it's danger. I'm going to tip South Africa in a close one, though that one could go either way.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be close, but if South Africa get their, and I've been there many times on the sideline of South Africa, and when they get their tails up and they get a roll on, it could be ugly for Australia. Particularly if Australia goes into this game, Ben, and starts talking itself up. That's the big danger. They've got to stop this talk about how good they are and actually put it in on the paddock. And then after that, yeah, maybe you'll get respected. Maybe Graham Henry will go a bit lighter on them. So I can see, even though, and I know there was one comment on YouTube as well about surprised that I thought South Africa was so good, given the state of the game there and the commentators giving it to them. Sometimes I think it's better to observe a team from the outside, and I have seen this before with South Africa, but there's so much talent in this side, and it is due for regeneration. Yeah. And I think, to me, that's why South Africa are going to be dangerous. And as you're right, I'm absolutely on your hammer here, and I agree with you, Ben, that this is a massive danger game for Australia. Doesn't mean they can't win it, but they have to park the talking and do it on the field, because if they don't, they're in for a touch-up.
All right, I'm going to go New Zealand by about 15 to 20, South Africa by about 5.
All right, same on New Zealand, but I think South Africa could be 15. So Australia, I don't think it's going to be a good trip to South Africa, put it that way, and then they have to go to London.
Yeah, for the Argies.
For the play Argentina, so look out for that one. Ben Kimber, thanks for joining us for episode 221.
Thank you, Giro, and everyone, keep the comments coming. As I've said, it really makes us think and pushes us around. If we're wrong, tell us we're wrong, tag a friend, post a comment.
Yeah, absolutely, and share it out. Thank you, Ben Kimber, and thank you for joining us, and please keep the messages coming on social media and spread the word. It's been a phenomenal couple of weeks, and we're really glad to have everyone on board, and we'd love to come out and do a show, a public show in a pub somewhere. I know Ben's been hammering me on that one. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on RuggaMatrix International.